So thank you all for sticking it out today. This has been an amazing day of conversation around transit-oriented development. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel. Chris Sturm from New Jersey Future had a great idea. We're talking about TOD. Why don't we talk about TOD policy? How do we get it done? It seems like some people in the state have the answer, but I think everyone needs to know, especially state agencies, on how to, be good partners. And by the way, I should probably introduce myself. I am Megan Massey, Assistant Director of Transit-Friendly Planning at New Jersey Transit, which is a state partner. I wanted to do something similar to what Claire L did, just really quickly, just so everyone knows how transit is faring in terms of like post-COVID numbers. So for the system, we, as of April 2024, 19 million trips, which is 85% of the April 2019 travel. That makes up 68% of our rail is back and 94% of our bus. So bus ridership has been the quickest to recover and also decreased the least during the height of the pandemic. April 2024 was the second highest, sorry, I just have to read this, ridership month we've had post-COVID since October 2023. So it's looking really positive on that front because you need a transit system to create transit-oriented development. So I'm in the transit-friendly planning program at Transit. It's Michael and I, a two-person shop. We provide technical assistance throughout our transit network. Megan Fackler spoke about the Transit Village program. That's an amazing initiative that's very unique to the state of New Jersey to promote transit-oriented development. And then we have the relaunch of our state plan, which will be great in prioritizing compact mixed-use development with an emphasis on locating new development near transit hubs. So what are we doing today, and why is Tom laughing? I don't know.
Because we're crossing our fingers.
We'll get there. So we are here because these are the TOD advocates, a sampling of them for New Jersey. So today we have Chris Sturm from New Jersey Future, we have Kata from RPA, and then Tom Dallassio, whose hat you're wearing is Vice President of Policy at New Jersey APA. And so these three groups in their agencies and advocacy roles actively advocate for TOD-friendly policies at the state and local levels. They provide research, tech assistance, and policy recommendations to support sustainable and equitable TOD initiatives throughout the state. So I would like to kick this off, and thank you again for staying. I know most of you have been here since 9 a.m., so I appreciate it. But I would like to kick this off with Christina, who will come up here. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Christina. I am the New Jersey Policy Associate for Regional Plan Association. I'm also a Blaustein student. Other hats I wear, I am a member of the Montclair Housing Commission, and I live in a very transit-oriented part of Montclair, New Jersey, and don't own a car. So I'm speaking from personal experience, and I can say it can be done. So today I'm going to talk about a report I had nothing to do with. So this is my colleague Marcel Negret working with one of our interns, Bansri Makadia, along with a couple other staff members. They have kindly briefed me on their work. So I highly recommend that everybody take a look at our website and read the report for themselves. I'm going to give a very high-level overview of it, and we're going to fly through the slides pretty quickly to give time for Chris and Tom. But if you guys have any questions, you can always email me afterwards, and I can direct you to our team. So Regional Plan Association looks at the New York metropolitan area, that is northern New Jersey, southwestern Connecticut, Hudson Valley, Long Island, and New York City. So as everybody's familiar, we have multiple transit agencies running around. We have the most extensive transit network in the United States by far. We also are having a massive housing crisis, as Sheena and others have mentioned. So more households across the region have been burdened by housing costs. So one solution that RPA has proposed for quite some time is rethinking underutilized land. So stations in New York and New Jersey are surrounded by approximately 74,000 acres of underutilized land, including vacant and unbuilt lot cover. That is basically the equivalent of Manhattan and Brooklyn combined. So there's a lot of space. So the team did a TOD opportunity analysis. Again, if you want the detailed methodology, highly recommend you go to our website and read the report. But basically, they just looked at New Jersey and New York. We weren't able to analyze Connecticut due to some parcel level issues. Little brief slide on what makes successful TODs. So they looked at the built form, mobility, environment, underutilized parcels, and growth rates. And these are a list of some of the indicators that they examined during this time. And so the team did a parcel level analysis of all the stations along MTA, Metro North, and NJ Transit. And they came up with a ranking system for transit orientation, where from low, medium, and high, which is pretty self-explanatory, and you can kind of see the color range there. They also did access to employment, which they categorized as 45 minutes via transit, so you can kind of see the colors indicate darker blue means access to more jobs, lighter yellow means less access to jobs within 45 minutes. They also took a look at unutilized land, whereas the kind of hot pink looks like infill opportunities with strong demand. The more white means limited development options. So what are some of the key findings? So TOD is highly restricted by zoning. We're in New Jersey, so I'm going to focus on New Jersey. Bergen County and Morris County were really the two areas where the team saw there were a lot of restrictions on zoning by stations. About less than 40% of all the stations looked at during the course of this project had zoning that was amenable to multifamily. And so the team, kind of using their various ranking systems, they came up with a color coding system on what stations were near term, which were ripe for TOD, which were emerging, and which were kind of lower priorities, would require a little bit more work to get them over the finish line. And so near term, as you can imagine, it pretty much has everything almost set. There's a couple improvements that need to be made, update the zoning code just slightly. Midterm, they might lack some physical characteristics or sufficient development capacity. They might need more extensive zoning changes to allow for multifamily and mixed use. Long term, they might have significant amounts of underutilized land, but there's a lot that has to happen. They also might have some sewerage issues. So near-term opportunities are concentrated in what the team called the urban core and the inner suburbs. When they refer to New Jersey Metro Core, they're talking about pretty much the counties that are closest to the New York City area. So Passaic, Bergen, Essex, etc. So TOD in the region, residential density around stations quickly increases with shorter travel time to the CBD, but it levels out after an hour or more. And really interestingly, the team decided to compare Long Island and New Jersey, which I always love to do. And we are doing so much better than Long Island. So this whole report is basically dunking on Long Island. Residential densities around Long Island stations remain low, regardless of their proximity to the CBD or the number of jobs, whereas New Jersey stations are a little bit more responsive, and you'll see higher residential densities as you get closer to the metro core. And so we want to talk about equitable TOD as well. So the team also looked at communities that were restrictive, segregated, and affluent. Restrictive meaning they had restricted zoning codes, segregated meaning that they were more than 50% white, affluent meaning that the median income was higher in that neighborhood around the station, was higher than the surrounding metro area. And then they also looked at racially or ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. And sorry, I'm going to go back to that one a little bit. In the New Jersey Metro Core, about a third of the stations were categorized as restrictive, segregated, and in affluent neighborhoods. New Jersey Metro Periphery, which is more further out counties, it's almost close to half. But again, there's also less stations out there. And so this map kind of shows you the visualizations of where we have really restrictive, segregated, and affluent areas that could be developed for TOD. A lot of that in Bergen County. And I'm sorry about the formatting of this. These were Google slides, and apparently they didn't translate well. And again, this is just a rehashing of the previous information. So what are some of the policy opportunities? This is where I'm going to let Chris and Tom really take the bulk of the conversation, but very briefly, New Jersey has currently, as everybody is aware in this room, currently 35 designated transit villages. I hope I have that number right. They also offer technical assistance and grants. We have recently codified the Jacobson decision via the A4S50 legislation. And we have legislation proposing to reduce parking minimums around train stations and bus corridors. That has not moved to my best knowledge, but we are definitely pushing for it. And that's it for me.
Chris, I do have slides if you want to.
Oh, yeah, great, excellent.
So hi, I'm Tom Dallassio. I'm the Vice President of Policy for American Planning Association New Jersey, and thank you, Megan, for inviting me. Appreciate it. I also am a lecturer here at the Dallassio School, and I'll talk a bit about one of the studios that we did that I think is apropos. And my day job is I'm the Executive Director of the Musconetcong Watershed Association, where we're actually trying to advance the idea of Asbury as a vibrant village and trying to go through the Complete Streets program, et cetera. And we'd love to be able to talk further about how to better plan communities like that. So how to pay attention to villages and hamlets in New Jersey are key as we go through. So I start off by reminding all of us, it takes a village, right? We need to understand housing and economic development and that they're key to transit-oriented development. We have a long history of communities. Many communities in New Jersey were TOD before TOD was cool. I mean, it's a place where people wanted to live and they worked and they shopped and we had transportation opportunities. But we need to understand where we are and where we're going to be on housing and economic development, in particular how commerce is working in the post-pandemic 21st century, and how do we adapt to local conditions and situations. As we've seen before, a TOD in downtown Newark is completely different than a TOD in Metuchen, which is completely different than a Somerville, which is completely different than in a smaller community. And we must be willing to change, to thrive, because we're either going to change and grow, or we're going to change and degrade. So let's figure out what we want to do. And last but not least, leadership matters. And I'm incredibly impressed with the elected and appointed officials that we've had today and we've seen all along. As a former elected official myself, I will tell you, nothing substitutes for leadership. And so you have to be in it, and planning is not for the faint of heart, right? But it also takes transit, right, to make a transit-oriented development. Service and reliability are key. People are traveling well beyond rush hour, and we started talking about this a couple of days ago, about how you'll see more people on the trains on nights and weekends than we've ever seen before. And that's critically important to understand that we're well beyond the idea of commuting, and that transit should go well beyond the idea of providing opportunities for rush hour. It has to be convenient, it has to be enjoyable, and we have to make sure that it is a true alternative to driving, because for better or worse, people have cars. It also has to go where people want to go. The idea of spoke and rail and hub and trying to figure this out, but you know, at some point we in New Jersey start thinking about how do you get from one point in New Jersey to another point in New Jersey. And my personal vision has always been we should have a connection between every county seat in New Jersey. Try doing that in something other than your car, right? But why not? I mean, this is our community, this is our state. So investments need to be done. And we need to be creative, and we need to be bold. And now is not the time to necessarily rely upon the past. We need to think about how we're moving towards the future. So New Jersey Transit gets it. And I know that because the Pink Book, 1994 document that first came out, I chaired the awards jury for APA New Jersey. And we gave New Jersey Transit the award for that. And I was so thrilled to have done that because it then served as a guidebook. And I've been using it in my classes ever since. So thank you, New Jersey Transit. And in particular, thank you, Megan and everybody, for updating it, putting a new document in 2022. We used this in our most recent studio. And if there are any other faculty here, I encourage you to use that document, as well as the website and the other information. Critically important. Shows you the power of government. I mean, folks who criticize government, there may be some legitimate criticisms. But if you're going to be in government, do something. And New Jersey Transit not only did something, but did something great by this. So, do others? Do others get it? You know, we've got recent affordable housing legislation, and I'll talk a bit about this and why that matters. The state budget, trying to deal with the funding. You know, we're just trying to deal with how do we keep our transit system in place that we've got right now, let alone how do we actually anticipate a world in the 21st century where Gateway happens. When are we going to start planning for that? In 2035 when it opens? Why aren't we doing that now? And it takes money, and it takes time, and it takes perseverance. And then last but not least, local zoning. And I will provide some suggestions before I conclude that are not official APA New Jersey positions, or Rutgers positions, or Musconetcong Watershed Association positions, but maybe they should be. So let's start this conversation. So planners get it. APA New Jersey went through a whole process of discussing the new affordable housing legislation. And we were in the fight on all this, and we provided recommendations. Some of the recommendations got in, some of them didn't. One of the ones that didn't was we're still using the idea of urban aid municipalities, and we're still providing an exemption for those municipalities for a prospective need. Meaning basically urban aid municipalities don't have a prospective need obligation. It's one thing to say that about Pleasantville, Camden, a couple of others. It's another to say that about Jersey City, Hoboken, Montclair, Woodbridge. Fundamental flaw in the legislation, and we've identified that. If the legislature and the governor had used Municipal Revitalization Index, which the state plan uses, it would have been much more appropriate. Montclair is 300 and something in the Municipal Revitalization Index, and yet it is in the top of the urban aid municipalities. Something's got to change there. Those affordable housing units need to be built, and they need to be recognized, and we need to encourage all of our agencies to work together. We're missing middle housing in New Jersey. We've had that discussion throughout the day, and we're going to continue to do that. How do you address the whole issue from the single-family home to the mid-rise? There are all sorts of options, everything from duplexes, triplexes, quads, courtyard homes, court buildings. We're going to actually have a session at the New Jersey Planning Redevelopment Conference on Wednesday, June 5th. I encourage you to check in on that. That's the next wave, I think, of conversation. And in my mind, transit-oriented development needs to think about these types of options, as well as, whoops, I've got to go back, sorry. We also need to talk about accessory dwelling units. And APA New Jersey has been key on the discussion with RPA and others, New Jersey Future, in actually encouraging the idea of accessory dwelling units. In my mind, one of the simplest ways to provide more opportunities for housing opportunity, especially in our transit-oriented development. So, students also get this going through, and I know that because in the fall of 2022, I led a studio and asked the students to think blue sky. Take away all the inhibitions, all the prohibitions. Let's think a bit about how we can actually encourage comprehensive planning along a former rail corridor. And so they looked at, in particular, the former West Trenton line from Ewing Township all the way up to Bridgewater, and how could we actually encourage more communities that people want to live in going through. And thank you again, Megan, to the folks at New Jersey Transit. We're full partners in this discussion. They put together various visions and principles, and I actually have a copy of the report here if anyone would like to see it. It's also on the Blaustein website. They came up with a vision. The Delaware-Raritan Transit Corridor will foster a sustainable region of equitable and affordable communities while providing convenient access to destinations throughout the Garden State and beyond. They decided to rename the corridor to link both the Delaware and the Raritan, and felt that that was a new opportunity for discussion. They focused their ideas around mobility and access, sustainability and resilience, equity and prosperity, and process and accountability. And the whole idea is where we actually have right now rail corridors that are not for passenger service, how can we start thinking about the possibility of encouraging more growth in those communities, the potential possibly in someday in the future for rail service? They set up some regional goals. And they identified in certain areas we actually have a transit desert. In one of those communities that used to have rail service, there's no public transportation service right now. So how do we deal with that? How do you deal with a rail line that has a regional approach, 2 counties, 2 metropolitan planning associations, 7 municipalities? A lot of challenges, right? How do you look at transportive corridor policies? And could they potentially qualify for the New Starts funding? But the bold item is one of the things I think is most important and one of the most brilliant statements of our students. It represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to plan for the region with huge benefits even without rail activation. That's the whole idea in my mind of transit-oriented development and for transit village planning. It shouldn't just be for the transit villages that are there right now. Can't we walk and chew gum at the same time? Can't we start thinking about where we want to be in 2050 and beyond? So here are a couple of ideas, and I've warned Megan about this. I'm going to throw a couple out here. How do we capture the value of transit investments? I long hold that transit riders and indeed all residents in New Jersey, as taxpayers, are stockholders in this corporation called New Jersey. Where is that value that we're getting in all of this? How can we actually capture some of that value going through? Who owns stock in a private corporation that doesn't have an implementable plan? Let's get there. So one of the ideas is in existing centers right now where transit exists, we should have a minimum housing density within at least a quarter mile of the station or bus stop. And if the town is not willing to do that, I would argue residents, stockholders, you have an opportunity, and I would argue an obligation, to get your value out of that. How do we get the value out of that? Well, we know higher density provides more revenue. Let's start thinking about how to do this. And if a town's not willing to do that, we need to start thinking about which of these corridors really serve a regional or statewide need and which serve a local need. If they serve a regional need, that planning discussion should not be limited just to that municipality. In centers where transit used to exist, we should start thinking about minimum housing density requirements. But you also have to have a commitment for transit service. I know it's a chicken or egg thing, but few people are going to move in a community with a promise of transit service. There has to be, in my mind, a true contract, a true obligation on all parts. Let's require transit service any new center designated by the state plan. Let's stop building subdivisions without any type of service going through that. And then let's understand the fiscal realities of transit in America and let's invest. So I look at the year 2050 as a critical year because I'm going to be 90 in 2050. And I think about my father who fought in World War II, the greatest generation, bought a house, drove. At 90, he was still driving. I don't want to be that. As much as I love my father and respect him going through that, I also don't want to have my son say to me what I said to my father at 90. Dad, what were you thinking? What were you thinking would happen? We have the opportunity right now. We have 25 years to do it right. Let's do it right and let's move forward. So here's the rationale again. You are stockholders in this corporation. You deserve a reasonable return on your investment. You deserve a vision and an implementation plan to make it work. Who owns stock in private corporations that don't have workable plans? You should demand and get more because you deserve it. Thank you.
That was great, Tom. I had no idea how old you are, but I've got a couple years on you, but I'm going to be 91 in 2050. I don't want to drive either. And my dad is 91 and he's still driving, so knock on wood. Okay, I'm Chris Sturm, everyone who I don't know. I work at New Jersey Future, which is a nonprofit organization that promotes smart growth and strong communities for everyone that are affordable, healthy, resilient, and prosperous. And we've been around for over 35 years doing this. And as someone who's been working on these issues for a long time, we need to make more progress and we need to make it quickly. So I like the 2050 challenge. I want to start with just a few slides on the rationale for TOD from sort of a different perspective. But I do need to mention we need it for safety, we need it for economic growth, we need it for equity. I spoke earlier today with someone who works in Newark who is working with lots of immigrants, the new Americans, who are coming from South America, from Europe, from Africa, who are used to urbanization. They expect transit. They're like, where's the bus? Where's the market? And, even in Newark, it's not good enough. But let's move the slide here. So from a climate imperative, You all know transportation is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in New Jersey. How do I do this?
You did.
Oh, good. Okay. So emissions are, dipped down during the pandemic, but they're heading back up from transportation. And, the major focus of the Energy Master Plan that's in place now in 2019 called for decarbonization of the sector, electrification, but it's not enough because, let's see, where do I point this thing? I'm hitting the big button.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so if we look at vehicle miles traveled through 2022, we see a dip in, during the pandemic, but it's heading right back up. And this growth in VMT is going to offset savings from electric vehicles. So that's a real concern. And we will be testifying on Monday on the Energy Master Plan and calling for a stronger investment as opposed to kind of lip service in land use and alternative modes of transportation. We are also going to need TOD in order to get around. So this slide only goes through 2017, but it shows you how public road miles in green have really flattened out. Meanwhile, VMT continues to grow. So congestion, and we all experience it. The pandemic has given us a slight reprieve. And I think, last slide, and I was really delighted with Megan's update. Oh gosh, is about transit ridership. There we go, I can point it over here. So this just shows you annual passenger trips. And so you can see that here we are in 2023, getting close to where we were back in right before 2000, and we're inching up, and hopefully that trend continues. There's a little bit of unknowns here. So now I'm going to switch away from slides and just talk, but we can have this up for inspiration.
There's happy inspirational quotes.
So we've heard great stories, great realities about transit villages and things that have been happening, but I want to say that TOD is not happening in New Jersey at the scale that we need it, and I think we all know that. 3 major constraints. One, we've all talked about zoning. Most towns, even if they're zoning for 3 stories around the train station, that's really not enough to take advantage of these statewide assets. People don't want change in their communities. They don't want even 3 stories in many cases. So that's a real obstacle. Our home rule state is not helping. With New Jersey Transit, we have wonderful folks in New Jersey Transit like Megan and the Transit Planning Unit. Jack Hannarek worked there for many years that are facilitating TOD. But there's also pressure from the governor's office to monetize transit assets, including parking lots. And it can slow down TOD. That can drive developers away. It can stymie the kinds of TOD that we can experience. So I think from the top of government, we need a commitment to TOD, not monetization. We need to think about monetization in the long term, not in the short term. And we are going to have a new governor in a year and a half, maybe that will help. And finally, economics are still an issue in many weak markets because in order to do TOD, we really need structured parking, which costs money. And in a strong market, you can get the developer to pay for that and make it work. But we need to make sure in weak markets that our economic development incentives are up to the job of cracking that nut. And developers now are going to be, they have to provide affordable housing as well, so there's a lot of internal subsidies that are needed. Now, as far as solutions, on the zoning front, as Tom mentioned, the Mount Laurel 4th round is going to be kicking off later this year. Towns will get their obligation numbers in October, and that means that they need to develop, and they should be looking towards transit area stations to do so. They will be getting a bonus credit, a 0.5 credit on top of the 1 credit per unit for every TOD unit that they build. And they also get a 1.5 bonus credit for redevelopment. Not on top of each other, they can't be used together, but that's great. New Jersey Future fought for those, and we're glad that they're in there. The commercial is important as well, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about zoning. We will be having a big panel on zoning reform from across the country at the Planning and Redevelopment Conference. It's a virtual session. You should all attend it. There's some politics in New Jersey that might get in the way, but more on that later. Okay. New Jersey Transit, I think, should have a long-term TOD plan with targets. So how many people and how many jobs should be located in proximity to train stations? And, looking at train stations with different levels of service. And what kind of progress are we making every year? Those, that should be public. And again, I think there are opportunities for EDA to enhance its programs to promote transit-oriented development. I don't know enough about it, but I think those opportunities are there. I would also like to, now I guess what I'll do is I'll suggest my big idea, which is let's go for a 2-tier transit village program. We have a very successful program. It's been around for a long time. It's been successful, but it's not dramatic. It's not getting us where we need to be. We need minimum densities near transit, as Tom suggested, and I don't think that our legislature is in a position to support that right now. So how about if we have an opt-in program that, if a town is willing to zone 50 units per acre or 100 units per acre or 25 if it's in a more rural setting within a quarter mile or what have you, whatever the numbers are, then they can get more benefits. And towns need benefits. I mean, it's hard for them to do everything that needs to be done well and get public support. So can Transit Village Star or Transit Village 2.0 offer free redevelopment planning and financial analysis services to towns so that they can really come up with a plan that takes the best advantage of the sites and allows them to understand what they can get from developers in a reasonable fashion successfully? Can they get perhaps from NJ Transit or DOT also top-notch design services to come up with a complete streets plan to surround the transit village? Because the beauty of transit villages is not only that people aren't driving in general, it's not just that they're taking transit trips, but if they're driving, they're doing a shorter trip and they're walking and biking and they're doing it safely. And that's, that can be done. We've seen all the great examples in Montclair, Metuchen and South Orange, but most places we don't. So on-call consultants, I think, would be a big help because these things are out-of-pocket costs for municipalities. And then they need some money to build those complete streets. And DOT is a wonderful agency. They have great local aid programs, but it's really hard to access those dollars, especially if you are not doing a simple resurfacing project. It's really hard to access the big federal dollars. So I would argue for a dedicated pot of money for complete streets improvements for Transit Village 2. And perhaps we should pilot this because it's hard to start big new programs, especially at the end of a governor's term. But what if towns could bid on a program that had a pot of benefits and submit their proposal for how many jobs and housing units they could get near a transit station, etc. Okay, so I do want to give a plug for John's 15-minute neighborhood report, which you all should have seen, and if you haven't, you should. It really articulates a lot of these concepts, and it has lots of recommendations which overlap the kinds of things that I've been talking about. I would also suggest that perhaps Transit Village Program 2.0, and maybe both programs, could move to New Jersey Transit, where it's a more natural home. I guess that's it. Okay, thank you. Looking forward to the conversation. Really want to learn from all of you and my fellow panelists.
Thanks, Chris. You really threw out a lot of ideas there. So, John, thank you. It is quite freezing out here. So we spoke about a lot. We didn't really touch that much. I mean, I know, Tom, you brought up affordable housing, but let's dive into that a little bit more. And I'm trying to. So, what are some innovative approaches or best practices for integrating affordable housing within TOD projects without compromising quality or the market viability?
I think I can state briefly, many people have already mentioned inclusionary zoning being one tool in a particular toolbox, reducing parking minimums around developments that are closer to train stations. I think Calabrese, if I recall correctly, I think it's Calabrese's bill that basically, one of our interns, Sophia Pereira, who's also a graduate of this program, we had her doing an analysis of this last year. Unfortunately, the bill died last year. It's been reintroduced in this session. But essentially, it reduces the amount of parking based on proximity to a train station or to, this was interesting, bus stations or bus routes where it was like 5 lines within a certain municipality. Got a little wonky there. We weren't really sure about the methodology on that one. But she actually did this wonderful map, which I can share later. But it was like 25, I would say 20 or 25, 30, and 50% parking reduction. And so you could really see a lot of development pretty much unlocked when you reduce at parking. Because I think, as somebody mentioned earlier, she knows like $30,000 per parking space for some developments, which is just bonkers. But I don't know, Tom, Chris, if you want to hop on that.
Well, as I mentioned, June 5th, 10:15, missing middle housing session, we will actually have a developer as well as an architect and APA National talking a bit about this. You may have seen in the New York Times 2 months ago an article about Palisades Park. They actually have, by right, you can build duplexes throughout the community. We need to start thinking about situations like that. And it's been in place since the 30s. So obviously the town didn't die. So these are opportunities. We need to think about how to renovate our existing homes and make them opportunities for multifamily housing. Thinking about maybe 2, 3, 4 units within an existing home. Architects are phenomenal. They can do incredible design work if you enable them to do that. And we need to find ways to actually design homes. You know, if a town really wants to have a community that looks like McMansions, well, that's fine. You can put 4 homes in those, right? There are ways to actually make that work. So design matters, and finding ways to encourage towns to actually put together design guidelines that actually make a place look the way they want it and then feel the way they want it. I guess the last point to raise on this is we have changing demographics going through that. Those of us who were around in the 80s and the 90s know that the big deal was single-family housing because you had people with kids and going through that. We're looking at the numbers now, and the majority of the households in the country in the next couple of years will be single-person or 2-people households. And we're starting to think a bit about what we do about aging baby boomers who don't need the McMansion anymore. The Generation Y and Z who are looking at not wanting to have to spend 2 hours cutting the grass every week. And then immigrants and others who want to be with their families going through that, but maybe not necessarily have to drive every time they go visit somebody. So there's opportunities. The market's different than it was 20 or 30 years ago, and I think it's a real opportunity to move forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would say, just building on what you both have said, that location of affordable housing is a really huge opportunity. So we're doing some case studies at New Jersey Future of some of the affordable housing that's under construction now from the third round. And we see in Denville, a place with a train station, that affordable housing is being built way outside of town.
Oh, of course.
On a forested hillside next to the highway. And there's some not so favorable remarks from the mayor in the paper. So it's no surprise. We see in Milburn, I don't know how many of you read about the recent court decision. The town refused to allow affordable housing on a site downtown that had, I'm going to get the details wrong, that had received some amount of previous approvals.
Yeah.
And so now the town has basically lost control of that site. Anyway, Google it. It's quite interesting. But basically, what we need to see is we need affordable housing in these prime locations near transit, and it's not a foregone conclusion that that will happen. So we have some new incentives, but in order to take advantage of the Mount Laurel fourth round, I think that towns need a lot of guidance, and there's a huge opportunity in the next year to provide that guidance. I was speaking earlier today to Walter Lane, who's putting together a Somerset County affordable housing plan for his towns to use. Once they get their numbers in October, they should be planning furiously to get ready for the June deadline for their housing elements. And so some of the kinds of things that we've talked about putting in a toolkit that could be like a statewide toolkit, and I know there's no funders in the room, but if there are, let me know, are things like density by design New Jersey style. So where can you go and see 6 units per acre, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, with site plans, with photographs, and where you could drive to actually see how it feels. How about, I'm looking at my wrong page of notes. Talking points. How do local officials talk about affordable housing and density in ways that win support rather than, really making people angry? And there's always going to be people who hate it, but we need to start connecting our general concern about the housing crisis with what we allow in our communities and with people who are working and need places to live.
And Chris, where do accessory dwelling units fit into that equation of maybe providing another type of affordable housing option?
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be another thing you could do, both affordable housing units and the kind of gentle density that Tom was talking about. I was just in Seattle visiting my son. I stayed in an ADU. It was one of two ADUs in the same house. So the three, this house was retrofitted to have 3 apartments. It was fantastic. I was in this neighborhood with like all these cute bungalows and flowers, but it also had, they have as of right redevelopment at like 2, 3, 4 units. So sort of modern, close to the lot line kind of developments. It's it was a real mix, but it was very walkable. It still felt very residential. And because Washington State is now there's a state law that towns require that. So Seattle's proposing to require that kind of as of right rebuilding in all of its residential zones and going out for public comment. So, good luck, but they have a state law. I just don't see it working in New Jersey in the short term.
And just like a really quick plug, just putting on the Montclair Housing Commission hat for a second. So Montclair has tackled this in a couple different ways. We have an inclusionary zoning ordinance. We actually have rent control implemented for 4%, except for 2%, I think, for senior citizens. And we have accessory dwelling units where I think the challenge is just kind of getting over that like mental barrier for folks. For example, we actually had a wonderful studio led by James DeFilippis, who came in, and the students kind of looked and created a affordable housing plan for Montclair that was presented to me and the other Montclair housing commissioners. And they flagged that of like the half a dozen train stations in Montclair, only one, the one that I live by, the Bay Street train station, really allowed for multifamily, the rest didn't. And the immediate response from the room was like, well, no, that's not quite true. Like, in some commercial corridors, you can build multifamily. And then one of the attorneys in the room correctly pointed out, the height is capped to like 2 or 3 stories. So there's a little bit of we need to have like an honest take on like what does our zoning look like, especially in a town that's as rich as train stations as Montclair. And as somebody who doesn't have a car, and I zip around Montclair by taking the NJ transit station up and down, I can tell you it gets really tricky on the weekends when there's no service. But and even just getting here, I like just to be clear, for me to get to today's panel, I walk to the Bay Street train station. I take that to Newark Broad. I then take the light rail if I can catch it to Newark Penn. Today I had to walk, and then from Newark Penn I took the Northeast Corridor line down here to New Brunswick and then walked. I'm used to that commute, but that's a kind of insane commute on a regular basis. And so when we talk about transit-oriented development and making communities more connected, we have to be real of what pedestrians are going to put up with. I have a high tolerance for pain. Most people don't.
Now I'm thinking just with time, let's open it up to audience questions. Eric, yes.
A question. Is there any thought about time, New Jersey Transit has a huge, multi-billion-dollar capital plan, improvements in individual stations or lines to where things are actually happening and which places have favorable policies? I mean, if you look at that like on a macro level, right? In the region, you mentioned Long Island versus New Jersey. So which place got the multi-billion-dollar, $10, $15 billion brand new station below Grand Central and new tunnel? Was it New Jersey or Long Island? So at a state level, is that coordinated? And can that
is that
turn to carrots and sticks?
I was going to say, super briefly, on the Long Island point, we've been trying to push Long Islanders to be more open to having development around their train stations because we point out, as you have just mentioned very accurately, they're benefiting from a lot of transit investment. It didn't fly. So we're aware of the discrepancy there, but please, Megan.
Oh no, please, Christina.
Sorry,
Yeah, it was a rhetorical question. I don't have the answer.
I guess another fundamental thing is just that nothing will be done unless we adequately fund NG Transit. So I think everybody here can agree that we don't have an adequately funded transit system. It has a 15% fare hike. We're facing potential $600 million in cuts in the next 2 fiscal years. And there doesn't seem to be a long-term plan in place to fund the operating, and the operating constantly raises the capital along with some other funds that it raises. And so if you want to have a real TOD development like we talk about here, like the potential for TOD, it first to start with supporting your transit system. So please talk to your legislators about this. It's actually very important, and the budget is up right now.
Nathan, can I jump in? I think it's time to put up or shut up. I think it's time that the legislators and the governor who don't want to support transit to tell us what's their alternative.
Yeah.
If there's a private sector solution to all this, let's hear it. Let's see what's out there. Let's see how we'd fund that and go through that. But if there isn't, it's time to stop this stuff. We don't have, I'm sorry, I'm getting too
No.
I don't have patience anymore.
No, and
There could be public-private sector initiatives going through that. Let's encourage that. I also think, and I agree, and I understand where Chris is coming from on this. It doesn't look like it's realistic to do some of these things. But we're starting to see some very strange political alignments happening. We saw it on Monday on the Oprah bill. We're starting to see libertarians and liberals working together for various reasons. And again, you can choose whether you want to do it or not. I think there's an argument to basically say there's a certain role for government and that's what should be paid for. We ought to find what that is, and that the private sector desperately needs capital investments so that they can succeed going forward. And if there's not a belief in that, and there's a belief that we can privately invest in high-speed rail, we can privately invest in autonomous cars, etc., tell us that. But don't run for office and don't be an elected official if you're not going to stand up and be in the game. I'm sorry.
No, please don't apologize. And also, RPA recently came out with a blog post, me and my colleague Zoe Baldwin, who's our VP of State Programs, and I borrowed very heavily from my paper that I wrote for Bob Nolan, who's in the audience, but we published a blog post basically on all the different ways that you could theoretically fund NG Transit. The policy solutions are out there. It's the political will that is lacking here. There are many solutions if you just even look to our neighbors in New York.
I wanted to comment that New Jersey has to grow a pair. Because they control so much real estate around the train stations in New Jersey, and they're afraid to do anything with it because they upset the local politicians. Look at the Princeton train station, Princeton Junction train station. There's acres and acres of surface parking.
Yeah.
And a private developer bought a failing flex office park that's going to essentially create the transit village. But there's still acres and acres of surface parking lot. A lot of it is controlled by New Jersey Transit. Why isn't New Jersey Transit insisting? I've always felt that if you're not going to allow for transit villages to occur, then you should reduce the service that you're providing at that community. And
Imagine.
I would love to see the first council meeting after they say, oh, by the way, no more express services out of Princeton Junction. Every resident that takes a train, and there are a lot of them, would show up and raise holy hell to the community. They have to, use tools they have too.
No, and please know that we are doing that. The TOD office is doing that, but internally first before, we have to create all the pieces and talk through our government community relations, to talk to the mayor, to then get buy-in before we're like, hey, we're going to develop your land on our property. And
I led the charge on the Hoboken Terminal New York project. They just broke ground this year. I signed an agreement with New Jersey Transit in 2005.
Yeah.
oh,
It takes time. And the time kills
later.
skills. It's not. So here, let's just talk about politics for a minute, because we all agree. We all agree. And you're doing everything you can.
Yeah.
So you've got the West Windsor. The only thing that's being built there was through a lawsuit. New Jersey Future was an amicus. It's going up. It's multifamily housing. It's 3.5 stories.
Yeah, it's that long day,
Yeah, it's better than nothing.
Massive parking lot garages.
What'd you say?
Massive parking garages.
Yeah, there's parking garages at least, right. So New Jersey Transit doesn't want to upset the mayor, and New Jersey Transit reports to the DOT commissioner, and who's now the chief of staff. And so So we need a new governor. I mean, I like Governor Murphy a lot, and the DOT commissioner's done a great job of fixing our roads, but that's the reality right there, right? So,
Go back to Tom's comment.
which one? Oh, yeah, right.
I like to grow up here.
That's definitely more. Oh, well. Yes.
I wanted to comment on the governor, I guess, sort of funding New Jersey Transit. He done, and I believe in late March, he signed the new, I guess, whatever bill, but they got transit funds. There was
They proposed a corporate business fee.
Sorry.
So that's been proposed. That's not been finalized. And so there's funding that comes through a couple different sources. You might be thinking of the Transportation Trust Fund, which was signed, but that is just different than having dedicated operating funding going to NJ Transit. I think NJ Transit in its entire history has never really had a consistent source of dedicated operating funding. It's just been kind of figuring it out as it goes along, which is not smart in terms of when you talk about a massive public asset that is a huge mover of people. It's an economic mobility device. There's so many benefits to NJ Transit, and yet we treat it in a way that it doesn't really deserve to be treated. If you want NJ Transit to work better, you need to invest in it. And so the governor did propose the corporate transit fee. It is for businesses that have over, and Chris, please jump in whenever I'm starting to screw up. It's $10 million in revenue. Yeah, so it's profit. And our partners, New Jersey Policy Perspective, came out with this amazing report just the other day that says how few businesses will actually be impacted by this. It is such a small thing. And RPA, we are not wedded to any one funding source. We want a funding source, and ideally it would be multiple funding sources so that if one source goes kaput, we have other options. MTA has a lot of sources to cover its operating. Right now, where things stand is that the budget is up, negotiations are happening. The conversation has kind of been stuck between the corporate transit fee and a potential raise in the sales tax. Other solutions really haven't rose to the top. And I don't know, Tom, Chris, if you want to hop in there.
Just a little bit. I mean, RPA's done an amazing campaign on this. The amount of media that you've garnered has been super impressive. But what's kind of disheartening to me is I haven't seen a single business voice speak up in support of funding NJ Transit. And it's because in part of the corporate business fee, but I think the governor's strategy, they raised rates so New Jersey Transit can make it through the year. And then it's going to be up to the next governor. Talking about leadership. So.
Well, we had the golden opportunity when we actually had that surcharge, and the governor and the legislature extended that for 2 years. And then because the governor made a commitment to eliminate it, they eliminated the surcharge in the last budget year. But the impact goes well beyond transit. Part of that corporate business tax also provided funding for open space, recreation, and historic preservation. And now we're going to lose at least $50 million a year because of that. So we need to think about these in comprehensive approaches and long-term solutions going through, and understand again that when people make determinations and commitments, it's time sensitive. We were in a pandemic and there was an issue about that. We're in the best economy we've been in decades, folks, and it's time now that we invest. If we don't invest now, we're leaving the next generation to pay for our excesses, and that's just not right.
Time for 2 more questions.
Just to ask Christina again, you mentioned the MTA having multiple funding sources. Could you explain or elaborate on that?
Yeah. I'm going to go back to the blog post that I published the other day about this. So I figured I'd be asked a question about this. So there's a couple different ways. And so I am not our New York policy associate, so if I misspeak, please note that it's not RPA's fault, it's my fault. But in New York, you have ride-hail fees. So they charge a surcharge per ride. They have the MTA surcharge, the New York State congestion surcharge. That's not to be confused with congestion pricing, but the New York State congestion surcharge has brought over $1 billion to the MTA in New York since its 2019 implementation. We don't have the exact ridership numbers for Uber and Lyft in New Jersey, but you can imagine it's kind of a lot. Maybe not as much as Manhattan, but if you had just taken a little snip of that, all of a sudden you have another option. Another thing that New York has that New Jersey does not is that in 2020, New York introduced a mansion tax on both residential and commercial properties to fund capital improvements. It's calculated at 1% of the purchase price for each $1 million in price with a sliding scale for more expensive properties. New Jersey could enact a similar measure and dedicate the funds to cover operating expenses or to cover capital. Capital has a couple different revenue sources of its own. And then you also have other things like a general sales tax. And we talk about sales tax, and I think there's a couple news articles out there fully about sales tax. But like Dallas area rapid transit, they get a little bit of sales tax allocated to them. So there's a couple different ways that we can go about this. And we don't have to be stuck with one or two or even three solutions. We can just look across the board and say what makes the most sense, what lessens the burden on low-income individuals, and what makes sure that NJ Transit gets the kind of support it needs.
Christina, again, in terms of some of those funding sources, what kind of resistance do you get in terms of communities or groups or what have you? Obviously, anytime anybody raises a question of increasing taxes, people go ballistic. So.
And I would invite, so I'm 32. I will be very clear about my age. I've only been a homeowner for a couple of years. So for me, my mindset is always I'd like seeing my property taxes go towards investments, and I like to see my public transit be funded. I like having more walkable communities. I like seeing us have more environmentally sustainable, more environmentally conscious acts by our government. And so for me, when I see and this is just for me personally, when I see my tax money going towards funding public transit, I'm like, oh yeah, thank you. Yes, please sign me up. We're in a climate crisis and a housing crisis, let's go. It's hard for me sometimes to understand where people come from with their resistance. Just very recently, I posted on LinkedIn this article. It was a Star Ledger editorial board, and they had cited some stuff that RPA had said about how 2/3 of New Jerseyans want accessory dwelling units. I'm going a little far from transit stuff, but just talking about ADUs. And I had a guy in the comments just hop into it and say like all the things that you always hear when ADUs are mentioned. It's like, oh, there's gonna be too many kids. Oh, it's gonna be so much infrastructure investment. It's gonna be too much of a burden. Oh, it's gonna ruin the character of our neighborhoods. And I got so angry. I just sat there. It was like breakfast time, and I sat there writing a very long comment back on LinkedIn, being like, just like trying to disabuse him of every single thing he pointed out, because there are so many crises facing my generation right now. I don't want to spend time arguing things that have already been litigated. I want to move forward. I want to see things being done. So I guess my answer to that is I have a lack of patience for arguments that are not in good faith.
So we ran out of time, but my takeaways are that New Jersey Transit has to grow a pair.
And New Jersey politicians.
And New Jersey politicians. We need to get a new governor, but we fully support what Murphy has done, as well as the commissioner. This was amazing. Thank you so much for agreeing to join us today. I really look forward to hearing both panels at the New Jersey Future Planning Redevelopment Conference, APA. Yes. So thank you again.